In the summer of 1971, if you walked into a Dodge dealership and wanted the fastest small block engine Chrysler made, there was one name everybody knew, the 340. Not the biggest engine, not the most famous, but pound for pound, it was arguably the nastiest small block to ever come out of Detroit. A lightweight V8 that screamed to over 6,000 revolutions per minute. An engine that embarrassed bigger rivals. An engine that turned ordinary compact cars into street fighters. And then, right at the height of its popularity, Dodge killed it. Most people assume emissions regulations simply destroyed it. Others blame insurance companies. But what almost nobody knows is that the death of the 340 was caused by a perfect storm of engineering realities, corporate economics, and a changing America that suddenly had no appetite for high-compression muscle cars. The truth is even crazier, because the 340 wasn't failing, it was winning. To understand why Dodge killed it, you have to go back to the late 1960s. America was obsessed with horsepower. Every manufacturer was building bigger engines. Chevrolet had its 302 and 350 small blocks. Ford had the Boss 302, Pontiac had the Ram Air engines. Chrysler had monster big blocks like the 440 Magnum and the legendary 426 Hemi. But Chrysler had a problem. Its compact cars were getting left behind. The Dodge Dart and Plymouth Duster were light, inexpensive, and incredibly popular with younger buyers. But they lacked a truly high-performance engine that could compete with Ford and Chevrolet's increasingly powerful small blocks. The performance landscape was shifting beneath their feet. Chevrolet's small block Camaro was dominating Trans Am racing. Ford's Mustang was getting faster every year. Plymouth and Dodge dealers were watching customers walk out and head straight to their competitors. Something had to change. The engineers at Chrysler knew something important. Bigger wasn't always better. A lighter engine sitting over the front wheels meant better handling, quicker turn-in, and less weight to move down the quarter mile. Physics doesn't lie, and Chrysler's engineers understood physics better than most people gave them credit for. They'd learned valuable lessons from racing. NASCAR taught them about durability. Drag racing taught them about power-to-weight ratios. Trans Am racing taught them that handling mattered just as much as straight-line speed. So in 1968, they started developing something special. They took the company's LA Series small block architecture and transformed it. The LA Series itself was already proven, introduced in 1964 as a replacement for the older A Series engines. It featured a more compact design and better breathing characteristics. But it was still primarily an economy platform. The engineers saw potential others had missed. The result debuted for the 1968 model year, the 340 cubic inch V8. On paper, it didn't seem outrageous. With a bore of 4.04 inches and a stroke of 3.31 inches, displacement came to exactly 340 cubic inches or 5.6 liters. But those numbers hid something clever. The short stroke meant lower piston speeds and better high RPM durability. The large bore allowed bigger valves and better breathing. It was an over-square design. In engineering terms, that meant the bore was larger than the stroke. This configuration favored high RPM operation over low-end torque. Exactly the opposite of what most American V8s were designed to do. The compression ratio was an aggressive 10.51. In an era where most family sedans ran compression ratios around 8.51 or 9.1, this was serious business. It required premium fuel. It demanded careful tuning. It absolutely wouldn't tolerate neglect. It received forged steel crankshafts, forged connecting rods, and high-flow cylinder heads with huge 2.02-inch intake valves and 1.60-inch exhaust valves. Those valve sizes were massive for a small block. For comparison, many larger displacement engines of the era ran smaller valves. The cylinder heads themselves were works of art. Engineers had carefully shaped the combustion chambers for optimal flow and flame propagation. The intake ports were generously sized. The exhaust ports were designed to scavenge efficiently. Every detail was considered. This wasn't an economy engine. This was a race engine wearing street clothes. The hydraulic camshaft featured aggressive timing and substantial lift. Duration was generous enough to keep the valves open long into the power stroke. overlap was significant enough to create that distinctive lopey idle. The carburetor was a Carter AVS 4-barrel. Later versions would receive the legendary Holley 4-barrel. Both were capable of feeding the engine's substantial appetite for air and fuel. The exhaust manifolds were specifically designed for performance, not quite headers, but far better than typical cast iron restrictions. The dual exhaust system featured minimal back pressure. Everything was engineered to let the engine breathe. Officially, Dodge rated it at 275 horsepower. Almost nobody believed that number. Even back then, engineers and racers suspected the rating was intentionally conservative. There were good reasons for the deception. Insurance companies based premiums partly on advertised horsepower. Racing sanctioning bodies used factory ratings for classification. Corporate politics meant not upstaging the big block engines. Many experts estimate the real output was closer to 320 horsepower. Some dyno tests suggested even higher numbers. Torque peaked at around 340 pound-feet. Interestingly, the torque number matched the displacement exactly. Probably a coincidence. Maybe. In cars weighing barely over 3,000 pounds, that was enough to create serious problems for competitors. The power-to-weight ratio was devastating. A Dodge Dart with a 340 weighed about 3,200 pounds. That meant roughly 10 pounds per horsepower using the conservative rating. Using the real numbers, it was closer to 9 pounds per horsepower. Many big block muscle cars couldn't match that. And then the real shock arrived. The 340 was fast, really fast. Road tests recorded quarter-mile times in the low 14-second range. Properly tuned examples occasionally dipped into the 13s. Car and Driver tested a 1969 Dart GTS 340 and recorded a 14.4-second quarter-mile. Hot Rod Magazine got a Duster 340 into the 13s. Motor Trend praised the engine's responsiveness and power delivery. Top speeds exceeded 120 miles per hour. That was genuinely impressive for a compact car. Many full-size muscle cars couldn't go much faster. A Dodge Dart Swinger 340 could run neck and neck with larger engine muscle cars that had significantly bigger displacement. Street racers discovered this very quickly. Big block Chevelles would line up expecting an easy win. They didn't get one. Boss 302 Mustangs found themselves in legitimate fights. Even some 396 and 427 powered cars were shocked. It wasn't supposed to happen. The engine became a giant killer, and enthusiasts loved it. Word spread through car clubs and racetracks. The little Mopars with the 340 were legitimate threats. Underestimating them was a mistake you only made once. But there was another reason the 340 became so respected. It could survive punishment. A lot of punishment. Many big block engines made enormous torque but hated high RPM operation. The 340 was different. Its forged rotating assembly could withstand repeated trips beyond 6,000 revolutions per minute. The over-square design allowed it to breathe freely. The high-performance camshaft kept power building deep into the rev range. The red line was officially around 5,500 revolutions per minute. Most drivers ignored that recommendation. The engine seemed perfectly happy at 6,000 revolutions per minute. Some pushed them to 6,500 revolutions per minute and beyond. Mechanics quickly noticed something unusual. These engines seemed nearly indestructible. Torn-down engines revealed minimal wear even after hard use. The forged components showed why they cost more. One Chrysler engineer reportedly joked that the bottom end looked like it had been designed for a truck. Maybe he wasn't entirely wrong. The engine had been overbuilt intentionally. Engineers knew it would be abused. They planned accordingly. And suddenly, Dodge had a problem of a very different kind. The 340 was becoming too good. By 1970, the engine appeared in some of Dodge's most exciting cars. Of the Dart GTS, the Dart Swinger 340, the Demon 340, the Challenger with the 340 package. Meanwhile, Plymouth offered it in the Duster and the Barracuda. Sales were strong, owners were enthusiastic, magazine reviews were glowing, everything seemed perfect. Insurance companies began paying attention, so did regulators, and America itself was changing. The cultural shift was happening faster than anyone expected. Environmental consciousness was growing. Safety advocates were gaining influence. The federal government was expanding its regulatory reach. You can probably guess what happened next. But the truth is more complicated. In 1970, the federal government passed the Clean Air Act. Almost overnight, emissions became the industry's biggest challenge. High compression ratios were suddenly public enemy number one. The 340's 10.5 compression depended on premium high-octane fuel. It also produced emissions levels that would soon become impossible to certify. Hydrocarbon emissions were significant. Nitrogen oxide production was substantial. Carbon monoxide levels were high. Every characteristic that made the engine powerful also made it dirty. At the same time, insurance companies started punishing muscle car buyers. Premiums skyrocketed. Some young drivers found that annual insurance costs exceeded their car payments. A 21-year-old male trying to insure a Duster 340 might face annual premiums of $1,200 or more. In 1971 dollars, that was devastating. Sales began softening. Dealers noticed the shift immediately. Customers still wanted to look at the 340 powered cars. They just couldn't afford to insure them. Then came another problem: fuel. America's relationship with gasoline was changing rapidly. Fuel prices were climbing, and consumers increasingly cared about economy. The 340 was not economical. Driven hard, it could easily return single-digit fuel economy. Even driven gently, 15 miles per gallon was optimistic. The idea of revving a high-compression V8 to 6,000 RPM suddenly looked irresponsible. Cultural attitudes were shifting. What had been celebrated was now criticized, but Dodge still wasn't ready to give up. The engineers tried fighting back. For 1971, compression dropped to around 10.251, a small change but significant. It allowed the engine to run on slightly lower octane fuel. Emissions improved marginally, power decreased slightly. Horsepower ratings remained officially unchanged, but everybody knew power had slipped slightly. The engine still performed well, but the trajectory was clear. Then things became even more difficult. The industry switched from gross horsepower ratings to net horsepower measurements. Starting with the 1972 model year, the change became mandatory. The difference was enormous. Gross ratings measured engines under ideal conditions, engines on test stands, no accessories, no air cleaners, open exhausts, perfect tuning. Net ratings measured them exactly as installed in the vehicle, complete with air cleaners, exhaust systems, and accessories. The alternator, power steering pump, air conditioning compressor, and everything else that robbed power was now included in the measurement. Suddenly, horsepower numbers across Detroit appeared to collapse. The 340's advertised output fell dramatically, from 275 gross horsepower to around 240 net horsepower. Some versions dropped to 235 net horsepower. Consumers saw the lower numbers and assumed the engine had become weak. It hadn't. The engine was fundamentally the same. Only the measurement method had changed. But perception matters. Marketing departments panicked. Sales literature looked terrible compared to previous years. Customers didn't understand the difference between gross and net ratings. They just saw smaller numbers and assumed inferior performance. And then the real nightmare started. The cost accountants arrived. Building the 340 wasn't cheap. Those forged internals cost money. The high-flow heads cost money. The performance valvetrain cost money. The specific carburetor and intake manifold cost money. The dual exhaust system cost money. Everything about the engine cost more than an ordinary small block. At the exact moment Chrysler needed lower costs and cleaner emissions, its beloved 340 was one of the most expensive small blocks in its lineup. Chrysler was facing financial pressure from multiple directions. Development costs for emissions compliance were skyrocketing, corporate average fuel economy regulations were coming, safety requirements were increasing, profit margins were shrinking. Executives began asking difficult questions. Why build an expensive high-compression engine for a shrinking market? Why spend money certifying an increasingly difficult engine to meet regulations? Why continue when insurance companies were actively discouraging buyers? Why invest in tooling and development for a dying segment? The answers weren't good. From a purely financial perspective, the 340 was becoming indefensible. The business case was collapsing. And then engineers made a fascinating proposal. Instead of killing performance entirely, why not create a compromise? The result became the 340's replacement. The 300, introduced in 1971 and increasingly adopted afterward, the new engine displaced 360 cubic inches through a 4.00-inch bore and a much longer 3.58-inch stroke. The displacement increase came almost entirely from stroke. The bore actually decreased slightly. This fundamentally changed the engine's character. Compression ratios were lower, initially around 8.5, 1:9, 1, depending on application. Much easier to meet emissions requirements, compatible with lower octane fuel, less prone to detonation. The emphasis shifted. Less RPM, more low-end torque, cheaper production, better emissions potential, easier certification, lower insurance premiums. The 360 wasn't a bad engine. Far from it. It produced excellent torque and eventually became one of Chrysler's most durable V8 platforms. The longer stroke created more cylinder pressure at lower RPM. Torque production was substantial. For trucks and normal driving, it was arguably superior, but it wasn't a 340. The longer stroke increased piston speed. The lower compression reduced the engine's appetite for high RPM. The character changed completely. The old engine had felt like a small displacement race motor, eager to rev, alive at high RPM, responsive and sharp. The new one behaved like a traditional American V8, torquey at low RPM, less interested in revving, more relaxed and tractable. Enthusiasts noticed immediately. Many hated the change. Letters poured into Automotive magazines. Complaints flooded Chrysler's customer service. Die-hard fans felt betrayed because the 340 wasn't just powerful. It had personality. You had to rev it. You had to work it. The power came alive in a way that felt exciting and mechanical. Shifting at 6,000 revolutions per minute was intoxicating. The sound was addictive. The 360 was more practical. The 340 was more fun. And practicality was winning. By 1973, the original high-performance era of the 340 was effectively over. The last true performance versions had been built. Remaining inventory was being cleared. Production had shifted entirely to the 360. America was entering the darkest years of the muscle car era. The oil crisis was approaching. In October 1973, the OPEC oil embargo began. Gas prices doubled virtually overnight. Rationing became reality. Lines at gas stations stretched for blocks. Insurance premiums were painful. Emissions requirements grew stricter every year. Compression ratios across the industry collapsed. Horsepower numbers fell like rocks. Entire engine families disappeared. The mighty 426 Hemi vanished. Production ended in 1971. Only a handful were built. Chevrolet's high-compression monsters disappeared. The LS6 454 was gone. The solid lifter's small blocks vanished. Ford's legendary performance engines faded away. The Boss 429 was history. The 427 was discontinued. Even the Boss 302 disappeared. The 340 became another casualty. Just another victim of changing times. Except there was one difference. Its reputation only grew. Racers discovered that the engine's architecture was incredibly capable. The large valves and excellent breathing characteristics responded beautifully to modifications. The strong bottom end could handle significant power increases. The cylinder heads flowed remarkably well. Drag racers pushed them hard. NHRA stock eliminator racers campaigned them successfully. Bracket racers loved their consistency. Circle track racers loved them. Short track modified divisions embraced them. Reliability mattered in circle track racing. The 340 delivered. Engine builders discovered they could make astonishing power. A properly prepared 340 could easily exceed 400 horsepower naturally aspirated. With headwork, cam upgrades, and careful tuning, 450 horsepower was achievable. Race versions could go much higher. Nitrous oxide systems pushed them past 600 horsepower. Forced induction could exceed 800 horsepower. The little engine that could. And because relatively few were produced compared with other small blocks, they became special. Production numbers varied by year, but only a fraction of Chrysler's total small block output consisted of genuine high-performance 340s. Exact production figures are debated, but estimates suggest around 200,000 to 250,000 total 340 engines across all years. Compared to millions of Chevrolet 350s, this was nothing. Over time, survivors became increasingly valuable. Then something interesting happened. The myths began. People started remembering the 340 as the small block that could beat everything. In some cases, they weren't exaggerating. Memory can be unreliable, but in this case, the memories were accurate. A well-driven Duster 340 absolutely could embarrass larger engine rivals. Magazine tests proved it. Owners proved it. Street racers definitely proved it. The stories became legendary. The engine's combination of lightweight construction, high-revving nature, and durability created something rare: balance. It wasn't the strongest engine in Detroit. The 426 Hemi made more power. Big block Chevrolets produced more torque. It wasn't the biggest. Dozens of engines displaced more. It wasn't even the most powerful on paper. Factory ratings showed higher numbers elsewhere. But everything worked together. The power delivery matched the chassis. The weight distribution was ideal. The gearing was appropriate. The whole package made sense. And that's often what makes a legend. Today, original numbers matching 340, powered cars command serious money. A pristine Duster 340 can bring $50,000 or more. Rare versions exceed $100,000. Collectors hunt for genuine engines with the correct X-cylinder heads and factory components. Date code correct engines are worth thousands. Matching numbers add substantial value. Original build sheets are treasured. Rebuilt performance versions routinely produce power figures the original engineers could only dream about. Modern machine work creates better tolerances. Computer-controlled CNC porting optimizes flow. Modern metallurgy provides stronger components. Electronic fuel injection can be adapted. Yet the thing enthusiasts still talk about isn't the horsepower, it's the feeling. Ask almost anyone who's driven one, and they'll say the same thing. The 340 wanted to rev. It sounded angry. That distinctive Mopar exhaust note with a hint of mechanical aggression. It felt alive. Throttle response was immediate. The engine communicated with the driver. It made compact Mopars feel like giant killers. David versus Goliath. And usually, David won. And that's why the story of the 340's death remains so fascinating. Dodge didn't kill it because it was a bad engine. They killed it because the world around it changed. Emissions regulations tightened. Insurance costs exploded. Fuel concerns grew. And the economics of building a forged, high-compression performance small block simply stopped making sense. The perfect storm. No single factor would have killed it. Together, they were insurmountable. The tragedy is that the 340 died at the exact moment it had proven how brilliant it really was. Peak performance coincided with obsolescence. It didn't disappear because it failed. It disappeared because it no longer fit the new rules of America. The country wanted different things: efficiency over excitement, economy over performance, responsibility over rebellion. And maybe that's why people still love it. Because the Dodge 340 small block represents the very last moment when engineers could build a lightweight, high-revving V8 simply because it was exciting. No compromises, no apologies, no committee decisions to soften the edge, no filters, just 340 cubic inches of pure American attitude. An engine built by enthusiasts for enthusiasts, raw, honest performance. The kind of engineering that prioritized fun over everything else. It represented an era that would never return. A brief moment when power was celebrated, not condemned. When performance was a selling point, not a liability. When engineers could follow their passion instead of just regulations. The 340 was the last hurrah. And what a hurrah it was. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments which forgotten muscle car engine we should explore next. The Boss 429, the Ram Air V, the LS6 454, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into the machines that changed automotive history.